Welcome. Small Things Forgotten is a small podcast about archaeology. The small parts. The people and places that even archaeologists might not remember, although once you mention it, they might recall it. Archaeology is about remembering at its most basic definition. To remember. To put the pieces back together. Devizes is a small town in Wiltshire in England. If you don't have a car, you have to take a train to Swindon and then go the rest of the way by local bus. The museum there is wedged into the terraced buildings of the city centre. There are no imposing columns or statues of lions. There's just a black and gold sign hanging above the arched doors that says Museum. Once inside, you have the feeling you've stepped through the looking glass or into a TARDIS. The museum wanders through an area much larger than the front door would imply, and it's filled with treasures from Wiltshire, the landscape of Stonehenge and Avesbury. It also houses a library. It's almost more of a short hall than a room. The walls are lined with antique glass-fronted bookshelves. There's also an elegant desk. A label says that it belonged to Maude Cunnington. It implies we should know who she was. Who was Maude Cunnington? She started out life as Maude Pig, born in Glamorgan in southwest Wales in 1869. When she was 19, she married Benjamin Cunnington, who was an archaeologist in Wiltshire. In fact, he came from a long line of archaeologists from Wiltshire. Since archaeology was pretty much the family business, their son Edward got into it, and that was when Maude also started joining in. And she got into it in a big way. The area around Stonehenge is also full of military bases. So when one of the first military airfields was built in 1897, Maude started rescue archaeology excavations. She worked ahead of the demolition crews just as archaeologists do today. In fact, she's pretty much the mother of rescue archaeology. She couldn't stop the construction, but she could preserve as much of the archaeology as possible. She recorded monuments and burial mounds that were destroyed by both military and construction of a golf course. When she wasn't excavating and recording, she was writing reports and analyzing finds. She became an expert in prehistoric pottery. She struck out on her own and started her own excavations at sites that included the West Kennet Long Barrow, All Canning's Cross, a late Bronze Age, early Iron Age village site. There's hardly a site in the Stonehenge prehistoric landscape that she didn't record. She was really the first person to view the various prehistoric sites as an entire landscape and adopted a holistic approach to the interpretation of Wiltshire archaeology. These were not just the weekend antiquarian digs where the elite went out into the countryside, hired a few farmers, and opened up some burial mounds to see what was there. Maude Cunnington conducted modern, full excavations, and she recorded everything. Not content to see archaeological sites destroyed, she and her husband raised funds to buy land on which significant sites were located and preserve them for future generations. None of this was easy. At the time she was building a reputation as an archaeologist, women were not allowed to vote or allowed to own property. Antiquarian societies did not allow women to be members until 1920, when the Sex Disqualification Act of 1919 ended discrimination in professional societies. In spite of that, she published reports and articles of her excavations in their journals. She was known as being a formidable woman, as she had to be in order to survive as an archaeologist. Male archaeologists considered her difficult and abrupt. She had an ongoing feud with Alexander Keeler, who was excavating at Avebury. She ended up banning him from the sites where she was excavating, but Keeler bribed her workers to spy on the excavations and report back to him. Despite the setbacks and workarounds, she persisted. She not only published her findings and joined societies, but By 1933, she was the first woman elected president of the Wiltshire Archaeological and Historical Society. Later, she was nominated as an honorary fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. In 1948, she was ordered a CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, for her contribution to archaeology. She was the first woman to receive that award. Today, any book written about Stonehenge or Wiltshire archaeology will have references to her work. She passed away in 1951. In her will, she endowed the museum in Devizes with funds to be able to hire its first salaried curator. The library there is dedicated to her. Her desk is there and all her books. It's a small space. It seems too small for such an amazing woman. This podcast is produced without ads, and the only sponsors are those wonderful people who contribute to my Patreon. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support it, I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/archaeology. Even $1 or $2 a month will help keep this podcast going. I also have a website, Ancient Tools and Craft. It's a web page about experimental archaeology, making things, and the tools people use to make them.